History isn't written in ink. It's written in blood, scent, and secrets, buried beneath Oxford's floorboards. One misplaced step in the restricted archives, and Minna fell out of the 21st century, crashing directly into a medieval war council, right into the lap of a lethal, feral king. The air in the restricted section of the Bodleian Library always smelled of decaying leather, dust mites, and an odd, metallic tang that Minna usually attributed to the ancient heating pipes of the Oxford University building. Her name was Minna Jenkins, and until November 14th, her life was a meticulously catalogued series of mundane events. She was a 27-year-old senior archivist, a woman whose most thrilling Friday night consisted of authenticating 16th-century parish records while wearing orthopedic shoes. She lived in the real world, a world of precise dates, carbon dating, and medical explanations for everything. For years, she had been an outpatient at St. Thomas's Hospital in London under the care of Dr. Harrison, treated for a bizarre, undiagnosed endocrine disorder. Her symptoms were erratic, sudden, blinding spikes in body temperature, an uncomfortably acute sense of smell that made commuting on the London Underground unbearable, and an inexplicable, hollow ache in her chest during the full moon. Dr. Harrison called it a rare manifestation of severe hormonal imbalance combined with sensory processing disorder. He prescribed beta blockers and heavy suppressants. She took them dutifully, desperate to maintain her quiet, predictable life. The anomaly began with the acquisition of the Radcliffe estate's private collection. Lord Arthur Radcliffe had passed away, leaving his notoriously reclusive family's library to Oxford. It was Minna's job to sort through the rotting wooden crates in the sub-basement beneath Duke Humphrey's library. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing with a low, annoying hum. She pulled a heavy, iron-clasped tome from the bottom of crate number 4. It was uncatalogued. No ISBN, no library stamp, no author. The cover was bound in a strange, pale leather that felt entirely too soft, too organic, beneath her latex gloves. She set it on her metal rolling desk and clicked on her halogen reading lamp. The title page was blank, but the first vellum sheet contained a hand-drawn map of a kingdom that did not exist in any historical record: Ethelgard. Below the map was a passage written in a dialect of Old English, mixed with something guttural and sharp, something that looked almost runic. As Minna leaned in, a sudden sharp heat flared in her chest. It wasn't her usual hot flash. This was an inferno. Her pulse skyrocketed. The air in the sub-basement suddenly shifted, the stagnant smell of old paper vanishing, replaced instantly by the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of crushed pine, fresh snowfall, and raw, coppery blood. She gasped, stumbling backward, knocking over her lukewarm cup of Earl Grey tea. The liquid spilled across the desk, but instead of dripping onto the concrete floor, it seemed to hang suspended in the air. The harsh fluorescent lights above her popped, plunging the basement into darkness, save for a violent, swirling ring of golden light that erupted from the pages of the open book. "Help!" she screamed, but the sound was swallowed by a deafening roar, like the howling of 1,000 wolves echoing in a wind tunnel. The floor beneath her sensible loafers simply ceased to exist. Minna didn't trip. She fell into the light. The sensation of gravity completely inverted. She was plummeting through a vortex of biting cold and blinding colors, the modern world ripping away from her. Her medical suppressants, the sterile air of the library, the hum of the city, all of it vanished. She hit solid mass with a bone-jarring thud. She didn't land on a stone floor or a patch of grass. Minna crashed squarely onto something hot, hard, and undeniably alive. The impact knocked the wind completely out of her lungs, leaving her gasping and thrashing blindly. Her vision swam with dizzying speed, adjusting from the blinding portal light to the heavy, flickering glow of torchlight and a massive, roaring hearth. She was sitting on someone's lap, someone whose thighs felt like carved granite beneath thick, dark fabric. Minna froze, the air seizing in her throat. She slowly opened her eyes, expecting to see a confused Oxford security guard, or perhaps a hallucination brought on by a severe medical episode. Instead, she found herself staring directly into a pair of predatory, glowing amber eyes. The man she was sitting on was massive. He sat at the head of a massive, deeply scarred oak table. He wore plates of dark, blackened steel over a tunic of midnight blue. A heavy cloak of thick, gray wolf fur was draped over his broad shoulders. His jaw was covered in dark, coarse scruff, clenched so tightly the muscles jumped beneath his skin. But it was his scent that paralyzed her. Beneath the smell of wood smoke and leather, there was a scent so powerfully masculine, so dominant, that it made her diagnosed endocrine disorder flare into a violent, agonizing fever. The heat pooling in her lower abdomen was instant and terrifying. She had landed squarely on the lap of King Dominic of House Valoria, and as his massive, calloused hands instinctively gripped her waist to steady her, his claws, actual elongated, blackened claws, tore easily through the cheap cotton of her Oxford University cardigan. "Assassination!" a rough, booming voice roared. The immediate silence of the room shattered. Around the massive oak table stood half a dozen men, all similarly clad in varying degrees of medieval armor and heavy furs. Swords, the size of a leg, were drawn in unison, the harsh shing of steel echoing against the high, vaulted, stone ceilings. "Stand down, Montgomery," the man beneath Minna ordered. His voice wasn't just a sound. It was a physical vibration that rattled through her ribs. It held an absolute, terrifying authority. "My king," she materialized from the ether. "It is dark magic, a trick from the northern rogues," shouted the man who had spoken first, Lord Cedric Montgomery, a battle-scarred giant with a missing left eye and a face twisted in feral rage. He advanced a step, his heavy broadsword pointed directly at her chest. Minna was paralyzed. She couldn't move. Her hands were planted flat against King Dominic's armored chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady, slow, completely unbothered by the fact that a woman in a beige cardigan and slacks had just dropped out of thin air onto his lap during what was clearly a military council. Dominic's amber eyes never left her face. They tracked her rapid breathing, the frantic darting of her terrified eyes. His nostrils flared, just once. Then, the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. It wasn't a subtle change. It was a violent, physical wave of pure, unadulterated instinct that washed over every man in the room. Minna watched in absolute horror as Lord Montgomery stopped dead in his tracks. The heavy sword in his hand wavered, then slowly lowered. His remaining eye dilated wildly. Beside him, another man, General Hugh Fitzgerald, clad in chainmail and a crimson cloak, dropped his warhammer entirely. The heavy weapon hit the stone floor with a deafening crash, but no one flinched. They were all staring at her. No, they weren't staring. They were smelling her. "Goddess above," Fitzgerald whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying mix of reverence and raw, animalistic hunger. His fangs, actual, literal fangs, extended over his bottom lip. She is mine." The word tore from King Dominic's throat. It was not a statement. It was a growl of absolute, undeniable ownership that carried a terrifying, possessive gravity. Instantly, the men in the room took a step back, lowering their heads, exposing the sides of their necks in a bizarre display of submissive surrender. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Minna finally found her voice, though it was nothing more than a pathetic squeak. I think I hit my head. Dr. Harrison warned me about the new medication." She babbled, trying to scramble off his lap. "I'm sorry. I don't know what kind of historical reenactment this is, but I need an ambulance." She pushed against his chest, trying to slide off his thighs, but his grip on her waist tightened. It wasn't painful, but it was an immovable restraint. "You are not bleeding," Dominic rumbled, his face leaning in so close to hers that she could feel the heat. radiating from his skin. His nose brushed against the crook of her neck, right over her wildly beating pulse point. She gasped at the contact, a bizarre, electric shock firing through her nervous system. "Let me go!" she panicked, slapping at his armored shoulder. Her modern reflexes kicked in. She reached into her cardigan pocket, pulling out her smartphone. "I'm calling the police. I swear to God, I will call the police." She held the rectangular piece of glass and metal up like a weapon. The men in the room gasped, reaching for their swords again. "A weapon of glass," Montgomery snarled. Her thumb fumbled in her panic, and instead of hitting the emergency dial, she accidentally triggered the flashlight feature. A blinding beam of LED light shot across the dimly lit stone war room, catching Montgomery squarely in the face. The battle-hardened warlord shrieked, throwing his arms over his face and diving behind the map table. "Sunfire!" She wields trapped Sunfire. "Witch!" "Silence!" Dominic roared, the sound so deafening it literally shook the dust from the rafters. The room fell deathly quiet again, save for the crackling hearth and the rapid panting of the men. Dominic looked at the smartphone in her hand. His amber eyes narrowed, calculating, intelligent, and completely fearless. He reached up, his large, scarred hand enveloping hers completely, and gently, but firmly, forced her to lower the phone. "You smell of rain on hot stone, wild vanilla, and fear," Dominic murmured, his voice dropping an octave. Meant only for her. His gaze locked onto hers, tearing right through her modern rationalizations. But beneath the fear, "You smell of heat. You are an Omega, an unbonded, untouched Omega, and you fell directly into the arms of an Alpha King, whose kingdom is dying for the lack of one." "I don't know what you're talking about," Minna cried, tears of pure frustration and terror finally spilling over. "I'm a librarian. I live in a flat in Camden. Please, just let me wake up." Dominic's expression softened, just a fraction. The feral intensity in his eyes was replaced by something entirely different, a fierce, protective instinct. He stood up, and in a single, fluid motion he hoisted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, as if she weighed nothing more than a sheaf of parchment. "Meeting adjourned," Dominic announced to his stunned generals. "Secure the perimeter of the keep. No one enters the royal wing. If anyone speaks of what has transpired here to the lower ranks, I will personally tear their throats out." With that, the King of Valoria carried her out of the war room, leaving her rational, 21st century life shattered in pieces on the stone floor behind them. Minna was placed in a room that defied the brutal, medieval aesthetics of the War Council. It was a sprawling chamber made of pale stone, warmed by a massive hearth that burned with sweet-smelling wood. Heavy tapestries depicting wolves hunting under silver moons covered the walls. The bed was a colossal four-poster structure draped in thick, luxurious silks and furs that felt softer than anything she had ever touched in her life. She was pacing. She had been pacing for what felt like hours. Her phone was dead. The battery had drained completely within 20 minutes of her arrival, leaving her entirely severed from her world. She had checked the heavy oak door 3 times. It was locked from the outside. She had looked out the arched, stained glass window. They were hundreds of feet in the air, looking out over a sprawling, snow-covered medieval city, encased by massive, fortified stone walls. Beyond the walls lay a dense, dark, forbidding pine forest that seemed to stretch into eternity. This wasn't a dream. She had pinched herself until her arms were bruised. The temperature, the smells, the heavy gravity of this place. It was all agonizingly real. But what was destroying her mind faster than the time-travel, portal-jumping reality was her own body. The suppressants she had taken that morning in London were failing rapidly. "Doctor." Harrison's hormonal imbalance diagnosis was tearing through her veins like liquid fire. Her skin felt overly sensitive. Her blood was practically boiling, and an intense, deep-seated ache radiated from her core. And underneath it all, a primal, entirely alien instinct was screaming at her to find the man who had carried her here, to find the Alpha. Stop it, Minna, she whispered to herself, digging her fingernails into her palms to ground herself. You are experiencing a severe psychotic break. This is a dissociative fugue state. You are in a hospital bed in St. Thomas's right now. The lock on the heavy oak door tumbled with a heavy clack. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the stone wall beside the fireplace as the door swung open. King Dominic stepped into the room. He had removed his heavy armor, wearing only a simple, loose-fitting black linen shirt that exposed a chest corded with thick muscle and a smattering of dark scars. The leather breeches he wore clung tightly to his thighs. He closed the door behind him, holding a silver tray laden with roasted meats, warm bread, and a goblet of water. He didn't look like a feral beast anymore. He looked like an incredibly exhausted, breathtakingly handsome man. But the raw power rolling off him was undeniable. He set the tray on a small wooden table, his amber eyes tracking her every movement. He could smell her panic. She knew he could, because she could suddenly smell his emotions. He smelled of deep concern, heavy responsibility, and a tightly leashed, burning desire. "You must eat," Dominic said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. He took a step back from the food, giving her space, a deliberate showing of non-aggression. "You are expending a massive amount of energy fighting the transition." "What transition?" Minna demanded, her voice shaking. "What did you drug me with? I demand to speak to the British Embassy. I am a citizen of the United Kingdom." Dominic frowned, a look of genuine confusion crossing his rugged features. "United Kingdom? Is that a territory of the Northern Rogues? Or the Eastern Coven? I know not of this. British Embassy. You are in the Kingdom of Valoria, and I have not drugged you, little one. Your body is waking up. The magic of this realm is stripping away whatever poison you have been fed to suppress your true nature." "I have a medical condition," she yelled, hysteria bubbling up in her throat. "I have an endocrine disorder. I take beta blockers. I don't have a true nature." Dominic's jaw tightened. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. Minna tried to press further into the wall, but she was out of room. "Listen to me," Dominic said, stopping a few feet away. His eyes bored into hers, demanding absolute attention. "My kingdom has been at war for 20 years. The Northern Rogues, led by a tyrant named Fenrir, have been slaughtering my borders. Why? Because we are dying out. Our packs are going feral, losing their minds to the beast within. Because we have had no Omegas, born in over a century." He took another step, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. "The Omega is the anchor, the calming force, the mother of the pack. Without them, the Alphas tear each other apart in aggression. Our kingdom is collapsing. We prayed to the moon goddess for a miracle, and then you fell from the sky." "I am an archivist," she sobbed, the reality of her situation finally crashing over her mental barricades. "My name is Minna Jenkins. My father was a high school math teacher. My mother..." She choked on the words. "My mother disappeared in the Scottish Highlands in 1999 when I was a baby. I am a normal human being." Dominic's eyes widened slightly at the mention of her mother. He closed the remaining distance between them. Minna flinched, but he didn't grab her. Instead, he reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. His touch sent a violently euphoric shockwave through her system. Her knees actually buckled, and she would have collapsed if his strong arm hadn't instantly wrapped around her waist to support her. "Jenkins," he murmured, testing the word on his tongue as if deciphering a code. In the old tongue of the Western mountain clans, the name Genkaris means hidden wolf. "You say your mother vanished in the highlands, a place of high stones and wild magic, perhaps." Minna stared up at him, her breath catching. The Scottish Highlands, the ancient stone circles, the fact that her mother's body was never found. The fact that her medical condition started hitting puberty, manifesting as extreme sensitivities that human doctors could never properly diagnose. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "No, That's impossible. Magic isn't real. Werewolves aren't real. Dominic gave a short, breathless laugh that held no humor, only a heavy, inevitable truth. He stepped back slightly, holding her gaze. Right before her eyes, the King of Valoria began to shift. It wasn't a grotesque, bone-breaking horror movie transformation. It was a fluid, terrifyingly beautiful explosion of magic and muscle. His skin rippled, giving way to thick, midnight black fur. His face elongated into a massive, terrifyingly lethal lupine snout. In less than 3 seconds, the man was gone. In his place stood a monstrous, pitch-black wolf, easily the size of a draft horse. The beast's head was level with her chest. It exuded a heat so intense it felt like standing in front of an open furnace. The wolf took a step forward, its massive paws completely silent on the stone floor. It lowered its massive head and gently, reverently, nudged its wet nose against her trembling hand. The scent of pine, snow, and alpha washed over her, completely shattering the last remnants of her modern, human rationality. Her body responded violently, a deep, instinctual purr vibrating in her own chest that she had never felt before. The Alpha King wasn't just proving he was real, he was claiming her. And the most terrifying twist of all was that the suppressed, hidden part of her soul, the Omega she didn't know existed, was desperately, eagerly claiming him back. For the first 72 hours, Minna's body went to war with itself. The human mind is a resilient organ, wired to rationalize the impossible, to prevent a complete psychological collapse. Lying in that massive 4-poster bed, sweltering under furs, she tried to clinically diagnose her own supernatural awakening. She told herself the blinding hot flashes were a severe thyroid storm. She tried to attribute the bone-deep aching in her hips and spine to a sudden drop in bone density from the beta-blocker withdrawal. But no medical textbook at Oxford or St. Thomas's Hospital could explain the way her senses had aggressively expanded. She could smell the metallic tang of snow clouds gathering miles away. She could hear the rhythmic, syncopated heartbeats of the palace guards, standing 3 corridors over. And, most terrifyingly, she could feel Dominic. The Alpha King rarely left her side. When he was in the room, his presence was a heavy, gravity-altering weight that settled her frantic pulse. Without him, the biological panic returning to her system was blinding. He sat in a high-backed leather chair near the hearth, reading reports brought to him by nervous squires, his glowing amber eyes constantly flickering back to her. "You are fighting it, Minna," Dominic murmured on the evening of the 3rd day. His voice was a low rumble of velvet and gravel. He walked to the edge of the bed, holding a damp cloth which he gently pressed to her burning forehead. "Your human suppressants locked your wolf in a cage of ice for 27 years. You must let the ice melt." "I am a human," she rasped, though the argument lacked any real conviction. Her skin felt like it was humming, vibrating with a raw, terrifying energy. "My name is Minna Jenkins. I live in Camden." "Your mother was Margaret Davies," Dominic corrected gently, wiping the sweat from her brow. His massive, calloused fingers were impossibly tender. "You mentioned her disappearance in the Scottish Highlands. When I returned to the war room yesterday, I had the archivists check the royal lineage of the lost. In 1892, our last true Omega, Queen Beatrice of the Western Coven, vanished through a tear in the veil to escape a feral uprising. The coordinates in the ancient texts point directly to the stone circles of your world, the Callanish stones." Minna stared at him, her breath hitching in her chest. The Callanish stones. Her mother had taken a solo hiking trip there in the summer of 1999. They found her backpack, her map, and nothing else. The police assumed she had fallen into the sea. "She didn't drown," Minna whispered, a tear slipping down her fever-flushed cheek. "She went back. She returned to the magic, but she left you hidden in the human world," Dominic agreed, his jaw tightening with a fierce, protective edge. "You inherited her bloodline. You are the rightful heir to the Omega throne of Valoria. And your scent." He leaned in, his nose brushing the damp hair at her temple. The deep, guttural purr that vibrated in his chest sent a cascade of liquid heat straight to her core. Your scent is driving every alpha within a 50-mile radius completely insane. He wasn't exaggerating. The atmosphere in the keep was thick with violent, barely leashed tension. The transition she was undergoing was broadcasting a powerful, instinctual pheromone across the territory, an ancient beacon signaling that an unbound Omega was ripe for claiming. A heavy, frantic knock echoed against the reinforced oak door, shattering the intimate moment. "My king!" General Fitzgerald's voice was muffled through the thick wood, tight with panic. "You must come to the battlements, now." Dominic's demeanor shifted instantly. The gentle caretaker vanished, replaced by the lethal, commanding warlord. He stood, his spine snapping straight, his eyes flashing a brilliant, terrifying gold. "Enter." Fitzgerald pushed the heavy door open but refused to cross the threshold. He kept his eyes glued to the stone floor, his hands visibly shaking as he gripped his sword hilt. He was violently avoiding looking at her. "It is Montgomery, sire. He has ordered the eastern gate opened. He claims that keeping the Omega here is a death sentence for us all. He sent a raven to the northern rogues. Fenrir's army is less than a league away." Dominic let out a snarl so vicious, so purely animalistic, that the glass in the windows actually rattled. "Montgomery attempts a mutiny?" Dominic's voice was deadly quiet, a terrifying contrast to his physical rage. "He is feral with desperation, sire," Fitzgerald pleaded, still staring at the floor. "The scent of the unbonded Omega. It is tearing the minds of the men apart. Montgomery believes if we surrender her to Fenrir, the rogue king will spare Valoria. Half the garrison has sided with him. They are marching on the royal wing as we speak. Then they will die," Dominic stated, simply. He turned back to Minna. The raw, predatory violence in his face was terrifying, but when he looked at her pale, feverish form, a profound sorrow softened his features. He reached down, unbuckling a heavy, silver-hilted dagger from his belt, and laid it gently on the furs beside her. "Lock the door behind me, Minna," he ordered, his eyes boring into her soul. "Do not open it for anyone but me. If I fall, use the blade." "Dominic, wait," she started, her voice cracking. But he was already moving. He stalked out of the room, his form shimmering as the magic of the shift overtook him. Before he even crossed the threshold, the king was gone, and the massive midnight black wolf tore down the stone corridor, a terrifying roar of alpha dominance echoing off the walls. The heavy oak door slammed shut. Minna was alone. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the hearth and the erratic, frantic thudding of her own heart. She stared at the silver dagger resting on the bed. The modern, rational Minna, the archivist who drank Earl Grey and color-coded her spreadsheets, screamed at her to hide under the bed, to pray for rescue. But as she reached out and wrapped her trembling fingers around the leather grip of the dagger, something else woke up. The fever that had been cooking her brain for 3 days suddenly broke. It didn't fade, it crystallized. A wave of profound, icy clarity washed over her. The pain in her bones vanished, replaced by an astonishing, terrifying physical strength. Her senses, previously overwhelmed and chaotic, suddenly dialed into sharp, lethal focus. She could smell the exact composition of the men marching up the stone stairs outside. She could smell their fear, their desperation, the sour stench of Montgomery's treason. And beneath it all, she could smell Dominic's blood. He was fighting, and he was outnumbered. Minna didn't cower under the bed. She threw off the heavy furs. She was wearing a simple, white linen shift Dominic had provided, falling to her ankles. Her bare feet hit the freezing stone floor, but she felt no cold. She grabbed the dagger, the Omega inside her, dormant for nearly 3 decades in a damp London flat, finally opened her eyes, and she was absolutely furious that someone was trying to kill her alpha. Minna threw the heavy iron bolt back and hauled the oak door open. The corridor outside the royal chambers was a scene of absolute, visceral carnage. Torchlight flickered wildly over the stone walls, illuminating a brutal, desperate clash of steel, claws, and fangs. Dominic, fully shifted into his monstrous wolf form, was holding the choke point at the top of the grand staircase. He was a terrifying force of nature. He moved with a brutal, calculating speed, snapping bone and tearing through armor as if it were parchment. But there were too many of them. Montgomery's mutineers, driven half-mad by the magical pressure of the Omega pheromones and the terror of Fenrir's approaching army, were throwing themselves at their king in suicidal waves. She saw General Fitzgerald fighting alongside Dominic in his human form, wielding his massive warhammer, trying to protect the king's flank. "Pull him down!" Montgomery screamed from the bottom of the stairs, his face twisted in a feral, ugly sneer. His remaining eye was bloodshot and wild. "Take the beast down and fetch the human woman. Fenrir will have her head on a pike by dawn." A massive soldier, fully shifted into a gray wolf, lunged past Fitzgerald and sank his teeth viciously into Dominic's hind leg. Dominic let out a deafening, agonizing roar, twisting to throw the attacker off, but the distraction allowed two more men to tackle him, pinning his massive front paws to the stone. Montgomery drew his broadsword and started ascending the stairs, a triumphant, psychotic grin on his face. Minna didn't think. She didn't rationalize. She didn't calculate the physics of a 27-year-old librarian charging a medieval warlord. She moved purely on instinct. She stepped out of the doorway and onto the landing. "Montgomery!" she screamed. The sound of her voice wasn't human. It was a resonant, vibrating chord of pure, authoritative power that echoed through the vast stone corridor like a shockwave. Every single combatant froze. The violence ground to an absolute, unnatural halt. The heavy scent of blood and sweat was instantly obliterated as her body unconsciously released a massive, suffocating wave of Omega pheromones. It wasn't the sweet, inviting scent of an unbonded female anymore. It was a heavy, dominant, paralyzing aura of absolute command. Montgomery stopped on the third stair, his eye widening in sheer terror as he looked up at her. "You dare!" Minna snarled, stepping forward. Her bare toes gripped the stone edge of the stairs. The silver dagger in her hand felt weightless. "You dare strike your king in my presence?" The magic in her blood, suppressed by 20 years of British pharmaceuticals, erupted. A visible, rippling wave of golden light pulsed outward from her skin, washing over the men on the stairs. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The men who had pinned Dominic whimpered, their eyes rolling back in their heads as they were physically crushed by the oppressive weight of her aura. They collapsed to the stone floor, gasping for air, forced into an immediate, biological submission. The gray wolf that had bitten Dominic whined pitifully, rolling onto its back and exposing its throat in absolute surrender. Montgomery tried to raise his sword, his arms shaking violently under the pressure of the Omega command. "Witch," he choked out, blood dripping from his nose as his capillaries burst under the magical gravity. Dominic didn't give him the chance to finish. Shaking off the men who had pinned him, the Alpha King lunged down the stairs. His massive jaws clamped directly onto Montgomery's sword arm. With a sickening crunch and a brutal toss of his heavy head, Dominic threw the traitorous lord down the stairs, disarming him completely. Montgomery hit the stone floor at the bottom of the landing and didn't move. The remaining mutineers dropped their weapons simultaneously, falling to their knees. Their heads bowed so low their foreheads touched the blood-stained stone. Dominic stood over them, his chest heaving, his midnight fur slick with blood, some his own, most belonging to his enemies. He turned his massive, terrifying head slowly, his glowing amber eyes locking onto hers. The oppressive, suffocating weight of Minna's aura vanished the moment their eyes met. The golden light faded from her skin, leaving her suddenly breathless and exhausted. Her knees buckled. Dominic shifted back to his human form in a blur of motion. He didn't bother with clothes. He sprinted up the stairs, catching her effortlessly before she could hit the ground. He pulled her flush against his bare, blood-slicked chest, wrapping his arms around her like a vice. "You little fool," he breathed, his voice thick with terror and awe. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent deeply, frantically. You could have been killed. He was going to hurt you, she whispered, dropping the dagger. Her hands instinctively tangled in his dark hair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a raw, vibrating connection between them that felt thicker than steel. I couldn't let them hurt my alpha. The words slipped out before she could stop them, but they were the truest thing she had ever spoken. Dominic pulled back slightly, his eyes burning with an intensity that stripped away the last remaining defenses of her human life. Say that again. My alpha, she breathed, looking up at the brutal, beautiful king of Valoria. Dominic let out a rough, triumphant groan. He didn't ask for permission, and she didn't want him to. He crushed his mouth against hers. The kiss was a collision of fire and instinct, a claiming that tasted of blood, magic, and absolute devotion. Her body arched into his, the Omega inside her singing a wild, victorious song as the bond snapped firmly into place, anchoring her soul to his. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors at the bottom of the grand hall burst open. A scout, covered in snow and breathless, rushed in, skidding to a halt at the sight of the kneeling mutineers and his king embracing Minna on the stairs. "Sire," the scout gasped, "the rogue king's army. Fenrir's forces." Dominic broke the kiss, keeping her securely against his side. He looked down at the scout, his expression a mask of lethal, unbothered calm. What of them? "They are retreating, sire," the scout cried out, disbelief evident in his voice. The moment the golden pulse hit the valley, the feral wolves in Fenrir's ranks collapsed. They are refusing to fight. The presence of the true Omega. It has shattered their bloodlust. The siege is broken. A ragged, disbelieving cheer went up from the loyal guards remaining in the hall. General Fitzgerald leaned heavily on his warhammer, looking up at Minna with tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head deeply. "Long live the Queen," Fitzgerald rasped. The phrase echoed through the hall, a rippling wave of devotion from the men who had, only moments ago, been fighting for their lives. Dominic looked down at her, a fiercely proud smile touching the corners of his mouth. "It seems your medical leave from the library is going to be permanent, Minna." She looked out over the blood-stained medieval hall, at the kneeling warriors, and up at the terrifying, magnificent werewolf king, who held her as if she were the most precious artifact in existence. She thought of her damp flat in Camden. She thought of the sterile smell of the hospital, the endless prescriptions, the quiet, lonely existence she had called a life. She wrapped her arms around Dominic's neck, pulling him down for another kiss. "Good," she whispered against his lips. "I always hated the filing system anyway. If you survived this portal jump and felt the heat of the Alpha King's gaze, you belong in our pack. Don't let the story end here. Hit that like button if Minna's Omega Awakening gave you chills. And share this tale with fellow romance and fantasy lovers who crave a real, raw escape. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a wild, heart-pounding update from the Kingdom of Valoria. See you next time.